Welcome to Becoming Brave Cariad, where I invite you to take some time out to relax, listening to stories and meditations with uplifting metaphors. Here you will find loving messages that speak directly to your subconscious mind. Taking time to nurture yourself nourishes your mind, giving it a mini holiday from the cares and concerns of daily life. After a rest, you can return with renewed focus to your tasks. Today's story is called Terrible Beauty. It was written many years ago. I always dreamed one day that I would tell stories to a wider audience, and I wanted to tell a story for people who feel that their life has been wrenched out of their control. A story that would bring comfort in the dark night of the soul that can follow when we have suffered a loss. A story of hope and courage to overcome the cruel moments of life. That deep hurt could come from a physical change, such as an illness, or an emotional shock, such as a bereavement, or sudden loss of employment, loss of dreams that suddenly seem unattainable. Anything that brings a sense that the life that you are living has not turned out as you hoped. Terrible Beauty is the story of Medusa. The traditional story of how Medusa became a Gorgon is a tale of terrible violence, a fitting metaphor for a life-shattering event. However, my own reworking changed the nature of the attack that made Medusa a Gorgon, mentioning no real detail, because this isn't a story of horror anymore. Terrible Beauty focuses on hope and love, two of the most powerful forces in the universe. So, get comfortable. Perhaps you might like to wrap your arms around your body and give yourself a gentle, loving hug. You might even try a slight side-to-side rocking motion as you breathe slowly. Just rocking side to side very gently as you breathe slower and in a relaxed way can be very soothing. Do whatever is needed to become comfortable as we travel back to ancient Greece. This is Terrible Beauty. It was a long time ago when a great wrong was done, and when this wrong was wrought, so very long ago, men and women lived very different lives. There lived, in the land of Greece, a young maiden named Medusa. Now Medusa was one of the great beauties of her time. Her hair flowed in black curls, a shining, frothing cascade to her waist, and her skin was the colour of dark, warm honey, as smooth and unblemished as her soul. And while Medusa was lusciously shapely, and many men desired her, it was her eyes that first drew Pergamon into her life. Such eyes, dark and flashing with dreams, for Medusa wanted more from her life than to marry and to live simply in the village that was her home. Medusa dreamed of being a priestess of Athena. Each morning Medusa rose early and walked to the temple to make reverence, seeing in the goddess her salvation from an ordinary life. She would gaze up at the statue of the stern-faced Athena and dream of shaping her own destiny. And then Medusa would return to her parents, and, with her two sisters, she would weave the cloth from which they made their livelihood. Such beautiful patterns, such vivid colours. And whilst Medusa loved to shape the textures and to seek different ways of making her work unique, she longed for nothing more than to weave a life of her own choosing. But like so many of us, Medusa didn't know how, and so she saw only the temple as her salvation. Now Athena was a merciless goddess with a jealous heart, and she envied her sister Aphrodite, whose loving, fickle beauty drew more worship, For men and women alike all sought the goddess of pleasure, and lively, vibrant Aphrodite loved to tease austere Athena, for who, she taunted, given a choice, would choose the dusty texts of learning when the passions of the body are so much sweeter? And Athena would argue that wisdom was more lasting than pleasure, to which Aphrodite would flash her mocking, knowing eyes, and laugh that though pleasure was fleeting, no man or woman would shun her temples. And Athena was left fuming, the echo of Aphrodite's scorn smarting deep within her. For all the other gods mocked her too, because Aphrodite's easy charm and very witty tongue won much affection. It amused Athena to watch Medusa every day making reverence to her, for clearly this was a child of Aphrodite, and made for the ways of men. One day, when Athena had been goaded once too often, she gloated to Aphrodite that the lovely Medusa was her disciple. And whilst the goddesses snarled and circled, each vying for supremacy, the god Poseidon overheard, and his interest was piqued. Poseidon assumed human form, a tall man, well made, with dark curling hair and intense eyes, for no god can hide his true nature. The eyes will always reveal that. And Poseidon reasoned that he would play a little joke on the two goddesses. He would seduce the fair Medusa. And being a god, his vanity never warned him that he would be very unwelcome. Now, Pergamon was the son of the village bard and trader. His father had taken his merchant ships to many different ports, gathering stories, trading precious goods, marrying a woman from northern climes. And so Pergamon was the best of both his parents. Golden-haired with dusky skin, inheriting both his parents' sharp wits, Pergamon was clearly destined to worship quick, clever Hermes, the winged god of travel and communication. As children, Medusa and Pergamon had been friends, the dark-eyed girl listening solemnly when the boy repeated tales from his merchant father, tales he had learned as he learned his future trade. And Pergamon had been away for many years, travelling as he traded wares and stories, weaving a little magic into the ordinary lives of the villages that he passed through. For Pergamon indeed worshipped Quicksilver Hermes, the clever god whose charm and mischief brought little fun into so many lives. And whilst Pergamon had learned the ways of women, he had always remembered Medusa's dark, flashing eyes, so attentive, so afire with dreams. So, grown to a man, Pergamon still retained a kernel of affection for Medusa in his heart, even as he flirted and dallied on his travels. Returned to the village, Pergamon watched Medusa make her daily trek to the temple, and, like so many men, he wanted her. And at first it seemed no different than a passing fancy, and he was clever enough to win her trust, renewing their friendship, walking from Medusa daily to the temple, and holding her interest with tales of far-away lands. He was careful never to take his eyes from her face, to give no hint of his attraction, for Pergamon had seen the disdain in Medusa's eyes when other men tried to court her. And at first, Pergamon loved just the challenge, the promise of enjoying Medusa as others never would. But Medusa was clever and witty in her turn, and he was never entirely sure if she was fooled by his feigned disinterest. At times he thought he heard the mocking laughter of the god Hermes, that his great wit and cunning was being foiled by woman. But sometimes Medusa would gaze at him with dark, molten eyes, and that kernel of affection in Pergamon's heart began to grow. At first slowly, like a seed in a darkened place. And under the warmth of her trust, her wit and her great generosity of spirit, his heart lightened from darkness unto day, and that kernel of affection was transformed into love. Pergamon could no longer feign disinterest, and Medusa soon noticed how his eyes would briefly flit away from her face, even as he struggled to return them there. And Medusa was puzzled as to why she didn't mind, for her love to be a priestess remained strong. Each day, Medusa promised silently that she would stop Pergamon walking with her to the temple, but each day she could not speak the words. They went on walking in the morning, comfortable in each other's company, sometimes hardly speaking, but unwilling to part. And so, when Poseidon came unto Athena's temple, Medusa was even less inclined to listen to any suitor, no matter how charming, for her heart already secretly yearned towards Pergamon. And at first Poseidon was silver-tongued, as only a god can be, but when she showed no interest at all, his vanity and his indignation swelled, and Poseidon stomped back to Mount Olympus, where the other gods laughed at him. Athena and Aphrodite were still arguing, all the eons of spite and jealousy spewing out between them like a whirlpool of bitterness. For Aphrodite secretly wanted Athena's wisdom, even as Athena wanted Aphrodite's charm and charisma. And that whirlpool tainted all the gods. Poseidon turned bitter under the teasing of clever Hermes, and he vowed to punish the human who had spurned him. Poseidon returned to the temple, and he struck without mercy, vowing that if he could not have Medusa, no one could. A magic curse sprang from Poseidon's trident, blasting Medusa with all the force of the god's hatred. Medusa fell to the temple floor, broken and bleeding. Poseidon raised the trident again, planning to make Medusa's death slow. But before the next blast, Poseidon felt Athena arriving at the temple, and so he left hastily. Athena gazed down at Medusa, her eyes vast and devoid of pity. Medusa struggled to her knees, gazing up with dark eyes of frozen despair, seeing for the first time the cruelty and the arrogance that all gods possess. And Athena suddenly hated her, this child of Aphrodite. Athena blamed Medusa, for gods always blame mortals. They consider themselves faultless, and with judgment in her eyes, Athena smote Medusa back to the ground. "Get out of my temple," echoed round the walls, and Medusa writhed in agony on the jagged paved floor. For slowly her body was changing. The long black curls writhed and shrank back towards her brow. Her limbs twisted into misshapen chaos. Her beautiful skin growing translucent, so that it shimmered as if made from precious stones. Athena left Medusa as a gorgon, a creature of terrible beauty. Medusa's face was still human, though the skin shimmered as if made from diamonds. That magnificent hair was now a mass of hissing snakes, but snakes of uncommon beauty. Such uncommon beauty, with burnished copper skin, that their sibilant movement hypnotized all who gazed upon them. And Medusa's body, once so shapely and pliable, was now twisted and misshapen, but her glistening diamond skin beguiled the watcher, until the Gorgon turned that desolate face of terrible beauty upon them, and then, unable to look away from the utter despair in those dark, molten eyes, any who gazed upon Medusa were frozen and turned to stone. And there can be no greater curse than to be denied the touch of another human being, to be denied even a loving glance. And poor Medusa dared not even gaze upon her loved ones, so she fled the temple and found a cave high in the mountains to hide in. And there Medusa mourned the loss of her dreams, the loss of her life, and the loss of Pergamon. But Medusa dared not weep, for Athena had turned her blood to poison, and the first tears Medusa shed had burnt hot tracks of pain down her face. So poor Medusa could not even mourn. But the very randomness, the unfairness of being struck down so suddenly by Poseidon, and the brutality of the treatment Athena meted out to her, that hurt Medusa the most. For Medusa was condemned to a lonely emptiness, her body a prison, a relentless reminder of her own blamelessness. For surely, if Medusa had merited such a cruel, bleak existence, there would have been some sense of justice, a sense of completion, some morsel of wisdom to help her make sense of her fate. But there was no understanding, only the brutal truth that sometimes life throws us more than we feel we can cope with, and a sense that Medusa was in a prison from which there was no escape. Pergamon waited the next day to escort Medusa to the temple, but of course she didn't show. And when he inquired of her parents, they believed she had stayed at the temple, as was sometimes her habit. Pergamon went there, and when a priestess mentioned this handsome man who had spoken to Medusa, he felt hurt and angry. But then, seeing traces of blood on the stone, and knowing her gone, Pergamon grew anxious. After much searching by the villagers, they gave up. But Pergamon kept seeking word of Medusa, travelling further as he traded his wares, hoping for information. And one night, having begged the god Hermes for a sign, Pergamon dreamed of the god. Hermes favoured him with the truth, and gave him a magical mirror, that Pergamon might view Medusa from afar. Pergamon looked into the mirror, and saw the Gorgon. The tracks of poisoned tears burnt into her face, the twisted curves of her body, the sinister undulations of the snakes. This was not his Medusa. He could see nothing of the woman he had loved, only a terrible monster. So Pergamon hurled the mirror away, cursing Hermes. And Hermes, being fickle, as all gods are, swept up the mirror and laughed, as if he had set Pergamon a puzzle. Pergamon returned to the village and tried to forget Medusa. He felt rejected, and over the next year he began to drink to forget. And so it was that when the hero Perseus came to the village, having had word of a terrible monster in the mountains, Pergamon was in the tavern, half drunk, only half listening when the hero boasted he was going to add to his glory by slaying a terrible monster. For Athena, being vengeful and cruel, now wanted Medusa dead, and so she had whispered through the dreams of many people that the Gorgon was a menace to be slain. When Perseus spoke the name of the beast, Pergamon instantly sobered, for Medusa was long forgotten to all but he. And suddenly, Pergamon remembered the frozen desolation in the dark eyes that had gazed out of that magic mirror. This was his Medusa, changed, but still the woman he had loved. And as Perseus casually spoke of slaying the monster, Pergamon grew angry. Medusa had been driven from him by cruel fate, not of her own choice. Pergamon looked deep inside his heart. He still loved Medusa, loved her in spite of the twisted cruelty of fate, the misshapen travesty of her body. For he still saw, in the echo of those desolate eyes devoid of hope, the woman that he loved. He remembered the little girl who had sat solemn and attentive as he spun out his stories as skilfully as she had woven beautiful clothing and tapestries with her sisters. Pergamon had only to see in his mind the flash of laughter in her eyes as they walked to the temple, or the dark, molten love in Medusa's gaze when he arrived to escort her. And those memories told him that he would always love Medusa. Their shared history bound him, and it was a grateful bond, for Pergamon knew that to abandon her had left him diminished, less than what he could be. And although he would never taste of her body, and although he could never again meet her eyes, and although Pergamon could never truly understand, could never fully understand the horror of what Medusa had been through, he knew that there was one thing that he could do for her. So Pergamon followed Perseus high into the mountains, and although he was unfit from a year of heavy drinking, Pergamon's desperate devotion spurred him on. He dared not leave behind the warrior's trail because he would then fall too far behind. And when at times Pergamon felt too spent to continue, too weary, too damaged for the grueling trek, he had only summoned to his mind the memory of Medusa's face in that magic mirror. The poisoned tracks of tears down her face gave him the will to continue, never staying put for very long. Perseus was fit and agile on the rough terrain, and seldom rested. For when a loved one may be taken away from us, what else can you do but keep striving? Keep striving to bring them whatever small morsel of comfort may best help them to keep their courage, keep their dignity, and let them know that they are loved, whatever the outcome. So Pergamon, exhausted but fierce in his devotion, came to the mouth of the cave not long after Perseus. And as he paused to catch his breath, he heard the slithering movement of the Gorgon. And for a moment Pergamon was afraid. What if he should recoil in horror? What if Medusa wanted to die, to make an end to her sadness? And what if Medusa still loved him? What future for them then, even if he could somehow prevent Perseus from ending her life? For once, clever Pergamon had no answers. And as he crept deeper into the cave, Pergamon saw Perseus edging toward the dark, misshapen outline, using the reflection of his highly burnished shield to look upon Medusa indirectly. And silver-tongued Pergamon knew that there was no reasoning with Perseus. The man was vain and boastful, and Pergamon could only hope to outwit him. There was a rasp of metal as Perseus unsheathed his sword. With his last strength, Pergamon rushed forward, throwing his body in front of Medusa, knocking Perseus ever so slightly off balance. And just that slight shift of balance, that slight shift of perspective, was all that was needed. But Perseus' shield lowered just a fraction, and the arrogant warrior found his gaze locked upon the sibilant, burnished snakes of Medusa's hair. And as the warrior fought not to look into her face, he was mesmerized by the hypnotic movement, the terrible beauty of the snakes. Perseus stood, arm still raised to strike, but unable to do so, keeping his gaze firmly fixed on the snakes so as not to turn to stone, for he knew well enough not to meet Medusa's eyes. Pergamon stood between Perseus and Medusa, and he saw that perhaps he could bargain after all. Taking a step forward, he met Perseus' eyes and said, "This is the woman that I love. Living this way was not her choice. She had dreams. We all have those, don't we?" Perseus, his gaze partly on Pergamon and partly on the snakes, looked puzzled. How could anyone love such a terrible monster? So Pergamon continued, "You dare not look into her eyes. To do so is death. But if you could, just if you could for a moment look into her face, what would you see? Would you see a woman? A monster? Would you see your own suffering reflected in hers? Would you see that there is still a human being in there? Someone worth loving, worth kindness?" Perseus looked at the ground as he sheathed his sword. Pergamon touched his arm. "I will stay with her for as long as she needs. You may leave here and tell everyone that you have slain the Gorgon. Add to your glory, I care not, as long as you vow never to return." Perseus chanced to look at Pergamon, careful not to look past him, and slowly nodded. And with an attempt at nonchalance, Perseus took his shield and left, humbled by the look in Pergamon's eyes, for the devotion that shone out of Pergamon's eyes was like sunlight through stained glass. Pergamon stood a long time with his back to Medusa. No words needed to be said. He had no answers as to how they would live out the rest of their lives, whatever lifespan a Gorgon may have. Perhaps a Gorgon might live longer than a man. He had no ideas about how he could ever look upon her much-loved face ever again. And while Pergamon stood, there was a faint rusting sound near the mouth of the cave, the slight flutter of wings, and the teasing, warm presence of the god Hermes. Fluttering to Pergamon's feet on the warm breeze there lay a magic mirror, double-sided. The voice of Hermes drifted through the cave like warm honey. "You can look into this mirror whenever you like. It will always show you the face of your loved ones, however close or far they may be. And if you are ever separated again, for whatever reason, know that all you have to do is look deep into its depths, and you will feel the love, the acceptance of the ages, the seasons of your lives, the comfort that comes from each other. It is the mirror of your heart. It is always with you, but here I make it manifest." Pergamon and Medusa lived out their lives, sharing the mirror, that each may look upon the other and know that they were loved. And although life had dealt them a hard blow, and both had been diminished by their suffering, still they found a way to be enhanced by it too. For each trusted the other absolutely. Pergamon foraged for their food, and Medusa always trusted him to return. And Medusa, in her turn, would gaze into the magic mirror with eyes warm, molten, and loving, and see in her reflection a kind of peace, a kind of acceptance. And this was mirrored in Pergamon's face. And over time, the eyes of the Gorgon changed. The frozen desolation faded away, leaving only a quiet joy, the joy of acceptance, whatever the changes to her body. When Pergamon became an old man and lay dying, Medusa gazed directly into his eyes, begging him not to leave her. But Pergamon did not turn to stone. At first his face just shone, as if 1,000 glittering diamonds graced his skin, and under the warmth of her gaze his face grew younger. And before his spirit left his body, Pergamon smiled, for Medusa had given to him the very same gift, the only gift he could give to her, all those years ago when he followed Perseus into her cave. Medusa set down the magic mirror and gazed upon Pergamon's much-loved face, then silently curled her body around his, gently cradling him, as she laid her face to the cool floor of their cave, and willed her spirit to join him. At first, Medusa felt a rush of warmth like a gentle hug. Such a gentle, subtle hug. Golden light spiraled and danced all around her, but her spirit remained with her body. And then Medusa remembered her beautiful, loving friends, her loyal snakes. "Will you join me?" Medusa whispered. "Will you join him?" The gorgeous, burnished copper snakes flickered their many tongues, and then as one they shut their glorious eyes and stilled, for they loved Medusa dearly, and had only been waiting for her to choose her way forward. Medusa felt her spirit lifted from her body, and suddenly she was walking in the most stunningly beautiful meadows. The snakes, freed from the spell, slithered softly to wrap around her arms like bracelets. To have legs again! Medusa blinked back tears of joy. Such a simple pleasure to be herself once more. And suddenly, strong arms gently slid around from behind to hug her, and a much-loved voice whispered in her ear how deeply Medusa was loved. Pergamon and Medusa stood for a long time in the Elysian fields, revelling in the simple joy of their reunion. And in the silence, they both realized that in life they had given each other the same gift, a power so strong that they could defeat all adversity, and in defeating all adversity they could still find moments of joy. So what was that one thing? That one gift? The balm that made life worth living for both of them? Well, it's really very simple. It was loving acceptance, the reflection in each other's eyes through the mirror of the heart. So when life throws us more than we think we can handle, it helps, sometimes a little, sometimes a lot, to remember that look, that reflection that says, "I'm loved." And this can come from the gaze of a loved one, the gaze of a pet, the gaze of a much-loved toy. Or it can come from standing and watching the sunrise or the sunset and feeling glad to be alive, connected with the planet on which you live. And from that sense of connection, that sense of belonging, that sense of coming home, whether to a beautiful house or to a cave high in the mountains, that connection gives us the courage to carry on living. You can return to this story any time you need to remember that, even in the winter seasons of your life, that courage, hope, and love can sustain you. Life can seem as fickle and as unkind as the Greek gods. Yet in every person there is a core of strength and courage. And that core, it may seem to be like a dragon sleeping, yet it is still there. My wish for you today is for you to know and feel deep down that you are loved. Perhaps you are surrounded by loved ones and already know and feel this in every fibre of your being. Perhaps you have many people in your life, yet feel alone and never feel truly seen or understood. Or maybe you are alone, yet you feel nourished by your inner and your outer worlds. The thing is, whatever the circumstances of your life, you are loved. Because right here, right now, I am sending to you the same gift that Medusa and Pergamon exchanged. I am sending you loving acceptance. Gently shut your eyes. Imagine that loving acceptance coming to you as a ball of colour. It can be any colour of your choice. Open the palms of your hands. The ball of light will gently nestle into your cupped palms. Then, ever so softly, The light sinks into your body, fizzing through it like sherbet, ever so subtly spreading out throughout your entire being. Take a few moments to rest in gentle, loving serenity, keeping your breathing soft and relaxed. If you wish, you may copy the breathing pattern that I will repeat now. If you wish to, you can continue to rest in gentle, loving serenity, keeping your breathing soft and relaxed, and allow yourself to drift off into a peaceful state of relaxation. But if you also wish to, you can choose to come back to the world and go about your day, having taken a little break and feeling rested and refreshed. You can come back to becoming Brave Cariad any time you want to relax or to take a little rest from the cares of your day. And my wish for you, along with knowing that you are loved, is that you become a warrior for your own well-being. Each time you choose kindness, each time you show yourself compassion, deep down you reinforce the knowledge that you are loved and cherished. It only takes a few moments to become a brave Cariad, a brave beloved. And until next time, remember that deep down you have grace and courage, that you are so loved, and that you count.